I'd like to welcome you to the place for intellectual, spiritual, and scriptural honesty. It's wonderful to have a place to go to. Jesus talked about this ecclesia. The ecclesia, and some people enunciate it ecclesia. We have various paradigms of pronunciation of the Greek, that is, in the day that Jesus lived in. Be that as it may, let's talk about the ecclesia for a moment. It's actually a place that Jesus spoke about where people could gather. It's a gathering place. It wasn't this building, so to speak, but it was a place of gathering. And so it may be in a cave, it may be at a house, it may be out in the field. And the purpose that I'm trying to make here, and I'm going to save some time because I know that I'm quite late this morning, and there are various reasons why we are. But I think that a lot of people are leaving church, and I applaud that. But I think that lots of people are leaving church and leaving things behind without thinking about it rationally. For instance, when you leave church, number one, churches have buildings. And we need to think about buildings. There is nothing wrong with having a building. And these buildings are simply where people gather together, and there's nothing wrong with gathering people. That's what happens when you go to a football game. They have football games at stadiums so they can gather people there so you can have fun. This is why we have buildings called universities where people can gather there and get an education. So there's nothing wrong with having buildings. There's nothing wrong with gathering people. Another thing that we used to do when we were involved in church is not just have a building and gather together, but we would have lots of fellowship, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's extremely positive to have fellowship, a social atmosphere, in this sense, to where you can be tested, and other people can be tested and actually grow. We don't need to become people who are, let's call it, practicing this concept of being a recluse. We need to get out. We need to experience life. We need to have great social skills. Unfortunately, if we look at history, we can see that many things or many people became very eccentric, and they simply left several things that were wrong, and they would become very much unto themselves. They were very much like mavericks, and I'm afraid, in a sense, that a lot of us are simply leaving church to become a maverick, one of these persons that just is so alone. And I think we're missing the point, of what life is actually about. God did not create us to be by ourselves. God did not create you to be just one person all alone trying to figure everything out and trying to reason everything out by yourself. God certainly wants you to experience life with other people. And so when we think about the concept of church, it's not the building that was wrong, nor is it the concept of gathering people. That wasn't wrong. That was very good. In fact, when you go to church, you sing songs. Music is wonderful. I love good music. I like the fact that people get creative with music, and they even get emotional with music, and they feel good when they do music. And music, it brings comfort. It really nuances various things, and we don't need to lose music. We don't need to lose that. So that's another positive thing that was happening when we were attending church. Buildings, fellowship, and we came together because we had a purpose. And leaving church and leaving the buildings, the purpose, the fellowship, and the music, that doesn't make sense. We needed to leave church only because there was something about the content, that is, the doctrine, that polluted the music and the fellowship. That was the thing that we needed to leave. We didn't need to leave the building. We didn't need to leave the fellowship, the connection with people that we love. We didn't need to leave all of those wonderful things that people were practicing. We needed to leave those teachings of hell and damnation and condemnation so we could move forward. And this is why the Apostle Paul, I think, really tackled this subject in a wonderful way. And I'm going to read a few verses before the passage that I want to deal with, and that would be found in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. In verse 21, he says, "You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons." Now, don't go too far with that term, demons. I keep telling people there are no demons, there are no devils, and there certainly isn't a Satan. However, if we understand word usage, we can understand that lots of things are in opposition to us. And so these writers were simply saying, there are various people who have ideas and even actions that do oppose something that's profitable, something that's good. And he said, let's talk about it. And I'm paraphrasing here. Verse 22, "Or are we trying to provoke God to jealousy?" And please don't go too far with this kind of meta-language. It really sometimes tragically portrays God as someone who is jealous, and he's certainly not in any sense of the word. We'll deal with that in times future. Are we really stronger than he is? That's not even a good translation. So let's just skip that for the sake of going straight to the text that we want to talk about. Verse 23. Paul makes this statement that really crosses the line. It really crosses the line of what he came out of. And please understand that he came out of a theology called Judaism. This theology of Judaism was a theology based upon law. And we can't really go and just bash law. That's not Paul's interest. In fact, if we read this from this particular translation, everything is lawful, but not everything is beneficial. In other words, people can do what they want to do, but everything that you do in life, that it doesn't have a purpose. It doesn't have benefits to it. Sometimes what we do, even though we can do it, it really destroys us. And so Paul is simply trying to tell us in wonderful terms, listen, you can do anything that you want to, but not everything is going to be beneficial for you and everyone surrounding you. As we keep reading, he says everything is lawful, but not everything builds others up. In other words, the Apostle Paul was trying to get people to focus, to try to get other people to focus on other people besides themselves. How many times do you meet people who are only self-focused, only worried about themselves? In other words, if you teach someone, well, there is no hell, well, then if that's true, I can go out and do anything that I want to do. I don't have to be responsible at all to anyone in life. That's not the point. The point is when you make the point that there is no literal torture chamber, that is, with people burning in it, called hell. When you make that point, you're simply trying to be honest and say, listen, the doctrine of hell, it really has no value. It serves no purpose. It's not legitimate to even use the argument of hell in any kind of context coming from the concept of God or God himself. And that's the point. But sometimes what people do is when they start hearing various things, they simply say, well, I want to leave church and everything that the church has been about. And so they start bashing the buildings and the people and the books. And I don't think that's healthy. I think the best thing for us to do is to take an approach that is extremely honest. For instance, you've heard me make so many comments about the Old Testament, and I thought this morning I would give you just a brief point or two concerning my attitude toward the Old Testament. For instance, I'm going to turn in my Bible. If you have a Bible like mine, I'm going to turn to what I call Bereshith. Now, Bereshith is actually the first book in your English Bible. It's called the book of Genesis. When I read it, I find something that's quite different than what I see in conversations today. I hear all kinds of people talking about, well, God created the heavens and the earth, and I believe in creationism. With that said, I need to plug something that's going on tonight from 8 o'clock, that is 8 p.m. Central Standard Time to 10 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time. Greg Bray, a biologist, is going to be teaching on what evolution is. Most people I meet have no clue as to what evolution is. I'm not going to interrupt him very much. I'm simply wanting him to come in, and as a biologist, I want him to speak efficiently concerning what he knows about evolution and how scientists are using this particular paradigm, if you will, to build models that are actually helping us in various areas of biology. For instance, in the medical community, we are gaining so much. We are benefiting much in every way simply because of various things that we have learned about evolutionary processes. And so Greg Bray will be here at this, well, not here at the studio physically, but he will be on our show tonight. And he's going to have his show also with Bob this afternoon, and Bob Graves has a wonderful show also. Please watch those two, but we're going to concentrate, and please call your friends. If no one has ever explored actually what evolution is, I think they're missing a lot. Now, back to the text. Bereshith. The Jews would simply name their books most of the time, and I'm talking about the practice of the ancients. They would simply name a book based upon maybe the first or the second or the third or the fourth word. And so in this case, we have Bereshith. It's the very first word, and so that was the name that they gave to this quote-unquote, not actually book, but this portion of their writings. They did not call it scripture, it was just their writings. And they had scribes who knew how to write and knew how to read. Most people were illiterate back in those days, and so people really paid careful attention to the scribes, those people who could write, those people who could read. Now, I hesitate here because I think most of us are challenged by the idea of what is biblical and what is not. The idea of the Bible is actually a term that has evolved into something that never was talked about by Jesus or any of the apostles or any of the prophets. If you told them it's not my Bible, for instance, they would laugh because that wasn't a concept that they had back in their day. In fact, the idea of Scripture wasn't an idea that they had. They simply were dealing with a handful of writings, and they knew that some people could write and read and other people couldn't. And in this case, we have writings that were being protected in a certain context. Now, the context we call Judaism. Now, within Judaism, Judaism is, in a sense, a political system, and yet at the same time, it's a theological system. It's both. And we could say that it's a philosophical system, it's a political system, it's a theological system, it's all of it, because it is. Now, when you read this book, it certainly isn't the first book written. And unfortunately, sometimes I think that we try to push this as the first book. When I read, for instance, when I read Bereshith, Bara, Elohim, etc., if I keep reading this text, I'm going to find that the first verse has absolutely nothing at all to do with God creating anything. Let me get a drink of water on that. The idea of bara is a concept that a writer is actually inserting into the context of an argument that's going on concerning a covenant. In other words, chapter 1 of the book that we call Genesis is an idea concerning a covenantal argument. And before I go further, I need to state this. I do not consider that any of us have the ability to understand the intent of any of the authors of what I call and what others call, who are linguists, the writing system of the Old Covenant, because it's simply an abjad. But we do have throughout history those people who carried oral tradition, that is, the Jews. These Jews carried oral traditions, and they had various viewpoints concerning the possibilities of what authors were talking about. They never claimed that they knew exactly the intent of any of the authors. And for the sake of making this clear, when someone said Moses or Isaiah or any of the prophets of old, when they simply use names, they would use these names to badge their arguments. In other words, these names became icons to the people. And so when you say Moses, most of the time you're not talking about the person or actually what he wrote, but you're just talking about what they have in the sense of an icon, in a sense, an idol in a sense. It's like, when we talk about certain things and concerning George Bush, one of our presidents, whether he said it or not has nothing to do with it. Much of the Bush doctrine that Sarah Palin couldn't even think about or even wrap her mind around or even state anything about, it was not all put together by George. In fact, I don't even think that George Bush knew much of what was considered to be the Bush doctrine. The same thing is true with President Obama. Much of the rhetoric that President Obama is simply put there by ghostwriters or those writers who write for him. He's simply the one who sells the philosophy of his quote-unquote party, that is the Democratic Party, and their position. And senators get together and they go through these arguments, and we have writers, etc. And so I'm going to leave the rest of that to you to figure out. But in this book that we call the Bible, we have this first book, and we have something that is interesting. In our English Bibles, we have God creating the heavens and the earth. And in a real sense, the Jews never looked at the heavens and the earth as this book of science. In fact, Bereshith, or the book of Genesis, wasn't ever looked at as a science book. It wasn't about when God created what we're walking on, that is the planet Earth. It was never about that. To the Jews, as we know, that is through the means of oral tradition, we understand that Bereshith, that is chapter 1, verse 1, is all about the making of a covenant. And the idea of heavens and earth in the context is all about something that represents what they knew to be true. So it's very, very metaphorical and never intended to be taken literal. Let me give you an example of how a Jew would respond to a logical argument. Maybe you've read John chapter 3, When Jesus was speaking to Nicodemus about being born from above, one of the things that Nicodemus does in the argument is this. He tries to be very, very, very sarcastic toward Jesus. And you would ask, how was Nicodemus sarcastic to Jesus? He was very sarcastic if you understand how the Jews thought. The Jews would never, in most instances, go literal on anyone. And when someone was talking with, for instance, for the sake of argument, a rabbi or anyone else, it was always understood that we are here to speak metaphorically. Our arguments are dealing with lots and lots of hyperbole. That's understood. When Jesus comes along, what Nicodemus does ask of him isn't of a metaphorical context at all. He asks him this question, and it's meant in a very rude sense. And I want you to listen to it. In other words, do we go and get this birth, that is, by going through our mother again? And, I'm paraphrasing here, but he's actually trying to insult Jesus. In other words, sometimes intellectuals sometimes will use sarcasms. They will go outside of their rhetoric, their normal way of dealing with other people, and when they think someone is foolish or stupid, they will just close the argument down, and this is called being, it's called intellectual snobbery, and many times this is practiced, and that's basically what Nicodemus was doing in chapter 3. Now, whether you want to accept that or not is not something that I have no problem whether you accept it or not. It's just a matter of linguistic fact. And so we have Jews who are always wrestling metaphorically. So when you go back to Genesis 1, and I'm going to a very good point, because Paul is saying everything is lawful. However, when you read the law, it doesn't indicate that everything is lawful. In fact, if you read the law, you're going to find out that if you break any of it, you're guilty of all of it. And if you're guilty of any of it, you're guilty of all of it. And the punishment is death. And so their sense and rhythm and balance of the entire idea of law is much different than what Paul is arguing in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. My point is, chapter 1, verse 1 needs to be understood metaphorically and its connection, if we understand referential points at all, and they are in this system of writing called an abjad. It refers back to a system of the makings of a covenant, not, hey, this is great science, that is chapter 1, verse 1, and throughout the rest of chapter 1 and chapter 2 and chapter 3 possibly. So my point is, how many people are trying to use the arguments, or do read, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth? How many people argue, yes, God is our creator from the standpoint, or from this text, and they use this text as their proof text? God is not saying, nor are the writers, nor are the Jews who are carrying on the oral tradition. They are not suggesting in any sense of the word that God created anything in this context. And I'm going to deal extensively on a Sunday night on one of our shows concerning the idea of technically what would bara in its various forms. If we took every, for instance, argument that could be made, if we put every vowel structure that could be possibly put to this abjad, are there any possibilities to it being a creational story at all? And the answer to that question is no. But when you tell church people this, all of a sudden they get this long face, they get sad, and they say, wow, this is not a creational story? Not at all. Do they feel good? No, not at all. But let me see if I can help here, because I want to encourage you. This is why Jesus said, you need a comforter. You need someone who will console you, because I'm telling you things that are radically different than your theology. You're not used to loving your enemies, and I'm telling you, this is what you need to be doing. You need to love your enemies. Let me read verse 2. In verse 2 of the book that we call Genesis, we find that there's this term that's mentioned here, and we can see it readily in our English Bibles. That is, we see the idea of this place of chaos. We see that some versions read that it doesn't have any form, that is, this earth, and some say that it doesn't have shape. It's in chaos, and the Spirit of God is hovering over the waters. Now, this is basically a parenthetic. It's been inserted into the text. I can't disagree with that. In other words, it's not in the flow. In other words, the author of this book, or the various authors of this book that tried to put this concept together, dealing with the metaphor of verse 1, were simply trying to get a rhythm, but they wanted to establish the point before this time. That is, when you say Bereshith, the possibilities of Bereshith, are at least 15-fold. It's amazing when you put the rhythms together. And we have 4 systems that have put rhythm patterns to this term and its syntax, and have not achieved anything that we can really say with all honesty that we have an accurate model at all. Let me continue. In verse 2, and I want you to ask yourself a simple question. Can you imagine that God just got finished creating the heavens and the earth? And then he said to the people, listen, everything is chaotic right now. In fact, nothing has shape, nothing has form. If you look at what the ancients claimed, that is an oral tradition, and if you look at what theologians have claimed concerning tohu vavohu, 2 terms with a conjunction in between. Tohu vavohu would be this idea of we have no form, we have no shape, therefore it's the concept of something that's chaotic. When theologians deal with this, and even those people who dealt with this through oral tradition, they would always, and I stress always, use tohu vavohu in the context of judgment. That is, it's in this condition because judgment has come to something. Now, in this case, it would be the earth. And I want you to perceive this for a moment. I want you to think about it for a moment. Verse 2 is indicating, if those of oral tradition are right, chaos came to the world. That is, this formless, shapeless, this thing that's void, this thing that has no structure. Let's just call it chaos. Chaos is here because someone took judgment out on this earth. Why is that important to understand? Because if you put it back into the rhythm of how people think about the book of Genesis, that read their English Bibles, God created what? In the midst of chaos, after he had put forth such extreme judgment on this earth. What does God do? That's when he starts creating this little small idea of a context for human beings to live in. So before Adam and Eve ever existed, we have extreme chaos, not in the heavens, but actually on this thing called earth. Now, the reason that I'm presenting this is not to trash it, but simply to get us to think about this. Why are these people attempting to write what they think to be true concerning God? And I want you to listen to Paul's words again. Everything is lawful, but not everything is beneficial. In other words, the practice of his people, what did they do? They were people who were very, 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 very inventive. They had no problems inventing laws. They had no problem saying, "Thus saith the Lord thy God." They had no problem putting God's name wherever they wanted to. They had no problem with that. But some people in that culture said, what we can do with the term God, we can control the masses. We can control our people if we say, in the name of God. In other words, God told me X, Y, and Z, and I am the prophet, so you need to listen to me. And so they took the easy way. It's the easy way of controlling the masses. You can simply say, well, God spoke to me and told me this, and this is the way that God is, and this is what we need to do. And I think today, in 2012, we need to ask ourselves the question, we have no proof that God ever said any of these things. Should we be guided? That is, use the old covenant as our authority, that is, let the ancients and their concepts of God, should we allow that to be the rule of thumb in our lives? I don't think so. If you read all of the Old Covenant, most of it's tragic, but from time to time, some of these guys make some sense. And I'm still speaking from the context of oral tradition. Now, you can't blame them for wanting to put together structure. And this is why I started out with the idea of Jesus stating the purpose, or actually the term ecclesia. You know, when we start gathering together, we can do something good with that. If we build a building, we can do something extremely positive with that building, in that building, and do something outside of the four walls of that building. We can bring music into the building. We can take that music and drive it deep into people, and it can be the most beneficial thing in the world. But I want you to think for a moment. With everything that we create, at the same time that we are creating, in a sense, a lot of cosmos, at the same time, we are creating a lot of chaos. And the same thing is true with these people. These people, they knew that there needed to be some sense of civility. Someone needed to state something and say, this is the way that it should be. Now, they may be 2% wrong, or maybe 100% wrong, or possibly only 1% right, or maybe 10% right. So the best thing that we can do is to look at what this has given us over the years. We can see that these people are struggling, and it's very much this. When you read and study the oral tradition and what's considered to be First and Second Temple Hebrew and also Aramaic, when you study this, you're going to see that their theology is transitional. I want you to listen to me for a second. I have this imaginary marker board to my right. And I don't know if this is on camera or not. I have no idea. Hopefully it is. You can't see this imaginary marker board, but I'm going to draw a line. Here you go. The line is going that way. And it continues to go that way. I don't know whether you can see my finger or not, but it's going that way. The reason that we here at the place, that is the New Covenant Group, the reason that we're not interested in trying to get you to believe, it's for this very reason. And I want to demonstrate to you something. And I may question you. I may get you to question even yourself. How many of you guys years ago used to practice what's called a fixed belief? In other words, you held to a belief, it was static, and you were unchangeable, and you thought that was good. Ask yourself that question. It was static. In other words, you believed something to be true, and it was like the Rock of Gibraltar. It wasn't moving at all. It wasn't going to change. Now, one of the things that I find to be so amazing is science students. Science students, before we found that the world was actually not flat, they really had a position. They believed, they perceived, they believed. And please understand that believing is just the effects of learning. And so out of what they had, that is what they could wrap their mind around, they believed that the world was flat. But the day that they found out that the world wasn't flat and they could enjoy getting in a ship and going around the world, that should have been the best day of their life. But it seems like as science students, I find that the science students simply did this. They took their science books and said, wow, this page isn't very good. Let's rewrite our science. And what did they do? They kept moving forward. In other words, today we have found that it's not just flat earth science that has been found to be wrong. We've had various kinds of science that's been presented to us since those days, and we have found various ideas, various beliefs that have been developed or, framed by the idea of science. We've had to change our mind various times. And that's the thing that's really nice about science. We're going to continue to change our mind because we are learning, we are evolving, we are moving in that direction. But the science teacher who becomes static, fixed, that is just like a dot on this line. If I could put a dot right here on this line and say, what kind of science student would you be if your belief became this and you no longer were moving forward? Would that benefit you? And everybody would say, no, that's crazy. You need to keep moving forward. Well, what if those people who thought about God years ago were wrong, and maybe God is much different? Maybe we do need to rewrite our theology. See, this is exactly what Paul is doing. When you study the Pauline corpus, he's rewriting everything he ever learned out of the context of Judaism. And he's simply saying, everything is lawful. This is wonderful to do. We can be intellectually honest and move forward. But at the same time, we need to be careful about this because not everything is beneficial. In other words, the Apostle Paul himself might be wrong about something. This is why I think that Jesus was so good in trying to teach his disciples. And please keep this between the left and the right ear. The term disciples, the way that he was using it in this kind of context. These people should be learners, ones learning, not getting fixed in a belief and trying to say, I have this apologetic and I'm going to defend my faith. I'm trying to encourage people. Don't say, I used to believe in hell, but I left my beliefs in hell to fundamentally come over to another belief that's static. And I'm going to hesitate here because I'm afraid this is happening all the time. I no longer believe in hell, Dr. Jones, but now I believe in another kind of theology, and now I'm stuck in that one. I'm simply asking you, what is there good about getting stuck in any particular belief? Why not, for the sake of argument, why not just get involved in the process and allow your mind to explore and learn every day? What I believed about my wife years ago is much different than what I think and believe about her now. And it's because I know more about her, and my perception, my abilities, my everything concerning her has changed, and it has become extremely beneficial. I'm suggesting let's not emphasize the doctrines of believing. The doctrines of believing cripple you. I don't have to talk you into believing. That just comes natural after someone presents to you an argument. Now, tonight we're going to have a biologist who will present an argument of evolution. Don't just jump off of a cliff and say, well, I've heard one argument, therefore now I believe in evolution. Don't become fixed in belief. Evolution, how we look at evolution, will change in the next 10 years. Every science teacher has to go back to college every 10 years and upgrade their science, because most of their science will be considered failed. This is why I'm teaching from this passage. This is a wonderful passage. Everything is lawful, but not everything is beneficial. Everything is lawful, but not everything builds others up. I think Paul's focus is we need to be building one another up. And how can we do this unless we are on this journey of exploring, discovering, learning, and not becoming one who's parked, that is, mentally. So, can we come together in buildings? Yes. Do we need to leave church? Yes, but in what sense? Do we need to leave the concepts of buildings? No. Do we need to leave the concepts of gathering together? No. Do we need to leave the concepts of singing songs? No. Do we need to leave the concepts of someone teaching? No. Teaching, the didactic approach, various other approaches of teaching, all of those are wonderful. Do we need to leave the concepts of having good social atmospheres? No. We need to take the good and the bad and the ugly and look at it and start rightly dividing these things. This is what science learned from theology, to rightly divide what's good, bad, and ugly about it all. See, it's not so much about rightly dividing the word. This is the authority. This is what God said. The concept of rightly dividing the word is spurious, because the author never intended it to be restricted to one concept of a Bible. We need to rightly divide everything. If you're in a conversation with your wife or your husband or your family or anyone, you need to rightly divide it. In other words, you need to reason it out. So what am I trying to do? I'm simply attempting to encourage you. Listen, we can look at all of these stories of the past, and we don't need to treat these things as not valuable. We can learn from their mistakes. That's what history is there for. We can learn from others so we don't repeat the same mistakes. Whatever they did right, we can take those things and do them better. And in this way, we keep moving forward. This is why Jesus came along and he said, listen, guys, I want to tell you a simple truth. You're going to do greater things than I ever accomplished. What do you mean? I thought Jesus did the greatest things. No, Jesus actually said, you're going to do greater things. When I'm gone, you're going to start doing amazing things. Don't get focused just on the past. Don't get stuck in the past. Right now, I'm dealing with various problems, but life will change. Life will go on. Life has so many things to offer you. Life continues. You can know. Get out there and explore. Discover what life is about. Don't be afraid. If you're heavy laden, come unto me. I'm going to give you rest. I want you to be comfortable. I don't want you to fear like those people of the old covenant. Those people were always afraid of God. You need to be comfortable. I love the pilots around here. These guys called the Blue Angels. They get in these airplanes and they do things that I can't do because I'm not comfortable doing those things. Maybe I need that comforter to come in me to the extent to where I can get in one of those airplanes and do one of those maneuvers. That would be wonderful. I'm simply saying that God is here to comfort us, not just in a spiritual sense. We need people who can do the best paint jobs. We have people who are part of the New Covenant group. They paint houses. That keeps the wood on our house there for a longer period of time so we can live there. That's wonderful. Learning, exploring, doing various things. These are the things that make life fantastic. I'm simply asking you, don't get stuck in your belief. Don't even think about the concept of believing in the context in which I'm speaking. Don't say, well, I'm a believer. Just say, listen, I'm in the process. I'm learning. In fact, what I believe today may change a little bit. And if it does, fine. If it doesn't, fine. I'm just going forward, whatever that means. You don't know what tomorrow may bring, but learn this. God has prepared your path. He's gone into your future to bless you with so many things, and be comfortable enough to say yes to something that we can rewrite and see and wrap our minds around that's possibly so much better than what the Apostle Paul even said. See, when I look at the Apostle Paul, what he was speaking about God is so much better than what the ancients were saying. And so let's look at theology in a sense like science. Let's make some transitions. Let's keep moving forward. Don't get stuck on that dot. Let's keep going forward. Thank you for your time.
Hi there, and welcome to Reflections with Rhonda Jones and Monica Livingston. And today we are coming to you from beautiful, I would say sunny Pensacola, Florida, but it's not very sunny today. It's actually a little overcast and getting ready to rain, so I'm not going to lie to you about that. Today we're going to have sort of a precursor to next week's show. Next week we're going to have two little bitty guests. One is 8 and one will be 7, give or take. And I'm not very good.
It'll actually be one's birthday. It'll be one's 8th birthday.
It really will be. It'll be one's 8th birthday. I'm not very good with details. I guess everybody's figured that out by now. But we're going to have 2 little ones on our show. Actually, it'll be pre-taped because you never know what kids say. What do Art Link letters say? Kids say the darndest things. But anyway, we're going to tape them during the week, and then we're going to talk about children and just enjoy talking about children. Today, we're going to mention a few things, some sad occurrences that have happened to some children in the news. But I'm going to get it started with a subject that I think is very, I believe you're either on one side of the fence or the other. I'm not sure there is a fence-sitting position that one takes with this subject. But I want to ask everybody out there, do you think, or how do you feel when somebody else gets onto your child? For instance, now obviously our children are old and grown, and we don't have to... Old. You know it's true. Old and grown.
Oh, goodness.
And so we don't have to really worry about that. Now, when somebody talks about your child, it still hurts you as a parent of older children and children-in-laws. But if somebody gets on to your child, for instance, Monica, would you get on to a child, say you're in a gathering and you see another child doing something wrong and the parent is there? That's my whole point. The parent is there. Do you think it's right for somebody else to get onto the child?
I think you should let the parent be the parent. Now, if the child's, of course, doing something that's going to harm themselves or harm another child, I might say, hey, especially if I don't think the parent's paying attention, or it might be just a gut reaction to say, hey, and stop the kid from climbing on the back of the chair as you see it tipping over.
Sure.
But when it comes to being in a gathering and knowing the parent's right there and the kid's just, too loud or
right.
Taking something from someone else and it's not going to cause physical harm to themselves or to somebody else, I'm going to try with all my might to let that parent be the parent, because I don't like it when it's done to me. And it's done to me, from time to time. And I truly think that, the parent needs to be the parent. The parent needs to be the one correcting the child. And, of course, like I said, there are instances where you may have to say something, but I think for the most part, parent be the parent.
Yeah, I do too. I've seen parents do that to other children when the parent is there. And my first thought is, what you need to do, you need to watch your own little darling before you, get on to somebody else's. And it seems like to me that most parents that do that, they don't get on to their own children, but they're more than happy to get on to somebody else's. But I think it's a general consensus between Monica and myself that, when you're in a social situation and kids are running and ripping and having fun, as kids do, they will be loud. They'll, get into little altercations with each other. But honestly, that's how they learn to be in these social situations and to get through it, because they don't get any easier as we get older. We still have to put up with the same things we did as children. They're just elevated, I guess you could say. So I try not to, even our grandchildren, I try not to get on to them or try to discipline them whenever you and Joey are around. Would you say I'm pretty good about that, or do I kind of overstep the bounds sometimes?
I would think you're pretty good about it.
I try to be.
I think that, as a grandparent, you may see where I'm maybe being a little bit tough or something and might need to lax up, and just not pick my battles more or less. Because I do, I still have to figure out how to do that one, pick your battles and not worry about every little thing, As parents, we learn as we go, and probably if I had a third child by then, they get away with everything. But,
That's true.
I say that you do a good job of it, and I know plenty that don't.
Well, I try not to interject myself into somebody else's social and family dynamic. I remember when our kids were smaller, an aunt of mine actually got on to Matthew. And it was in, our own home, but Matthew was doing something, going round and round with a car on a table, and she, I didn't have a problem with it. It was my table, my son, car, but on and on and on, and I don't even know that she told him to stop or something, but she took it upon herself to jerk him up and spank him. And it took everything I could do not to just, you know what I'm saying?
Scratch your eyes out.
No, it wasn't that bad, but I guess maybe that was the sore point that,
right.
Then I realized from that point on, let the parent. Now, if you have a problem with my child, come say, hey, you know what, so-and-so is doing this and that, and it might need a little attention if I'm not paying attention. I think that's a good rule of thumb to use, is let the parent discipline the child, and if they're in the room, in the general vicinity. Otherwise, of course, we all, like Hillary Clinton said, it takes a village, and it does. And so we do need to be responsible to each other and help children along the way. But to actually discipline a child and correct a child when the parent's there, I just think it's over the top, my opinion. But we want to know your opinion too. So if you have one on this particular subject, you can text us at 850-572-7441 and let us know what you think, what your opinion is, and if you've had any situations that have really kind of got under your skin when it's happened to your child, or are you one that feels like you can correct anybody you want to, and you may have a good point for that. Now, we have a few more stories concerning children. One of them is about a 14-year-old girl, I believe in Pakistan, I think. Yeah, Monica has the story on this. So proud of her for standing up for education for women, because it's not only in this country that women and girls sometimes get the shaft, and we're doing much better in the United States, but in a lot of other countries, women and girls aren't even afforded the opportunity to be educated, and whenever they stand up for it, they're really putting their lives at risk. And this is the story of a 14-year-old, Monica.
Yeah, she's a 14-year-old girl from Pakistan. Her name's Malayla, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, and I may not be. But she has been an advocate for girls getting an education. And, she's done this for a number of years, if I've understood the articles correctly. And she's been threatened many times. And she really hasn't. And then I have to applaud her in this, because, you get people that make threats, and, we live here in the South where, they'd rather shoot you than look at you half the time.
True.
And they'll say that, they're going to go get their gun, or, and you hear threats all the time. And you have to pay heed to what the mindset of the person is. But, she didn't, live her life in fear. She didn't stop what she was doing and say, I have to hide and I have to keep my opinions to myself. But she did. She stood up in the forefront, and she was getting an education, and her friends were getting an education, and she was activist for this, for girls having the right to be educated. And that, that's just...
It's hard to hear somebody say that, or even for you to say that, the right for girls to be educated.
Yeah, and that's a crazy thing, is we went to a Girl Scout function, me and my daughter and our troop, yesterday, where we were celebrating 100 years of Girl Scouting. And they mentioned that when Juliet Gordon Low first started Girl Scouting, girls didn't have the right to be educated. So, you know, and you just think, wow, you know.
Yeah.
And then, you know, of course, it brought my mind back to this article that I'd read earlier about this young girl. But, I mean, she didn't live her life in fear, and she was right out there in the forefront, and she was either walking to or from school, her and a couple friends, and they were shot by the Taliban. And she'd been threatened many times. And there's a lot of uprising in support of this young girl. And her father said, you know, this isn't going to stop everything. If she lives through this, we're not going to stop, you know. She's not going to stop. She wouldn't want to stop. She'd want to keep going. And you know, they do fear for her safety now. They're thinking she's going to have to
go into hiding.
Go into hiding to some degree. But, you know, she doesn't intend to stop from what her parents say.
Well, the way I understood the article that I read, it was, I think they were on a bus, possibly, it seems like. Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like they were on a bus and full of girls, and these masked Taliban hoodlums, I don't know whatever the word, I don't want to say men, I don't think men should act that way, but hoodlums come on the bus, and they asked for this girl by name. So she had already made this name for herself at 14 to be this, you know, reformer, this activist. And they asked where, you know, Malia, who's Malia? And somehow, I don't know if somebody pointed her out, or they just knew, or she looked up, and they just shot her point blank, you know, several times. And I think the girl beside her was injured as well.
Yeah, there were a couple of them that were injured.
Right. And, you know, that's one of the worst fears in the world, is to have somebody point a gun at me. I mean, that would be petrifying to me. But from what I understood, she took it like a boss. I mean, she, you know, was almost like, you know, here I am, you know, and was injured. And so our thoughts and prayers go out to Malia, and also every woman and girl in the world that has to fight for, you know, a basic human right or need is to learn, to gain knowledge. And, you know, what would she pass on to her children? You know, if you don't gain any kind of information or knowledge, you don't have this legacy to give on to your children. But this girl has a great legacy. And so, you know, we may not be brave enough to stand up to a gunman, but I do believe that all women can be brave enough to do something. And kind of segue into this being Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And it's good to give money to the American Cancer Society to help women that cannot afford mammograms to be able to afford mammograms. But if you don't have extra money, what are some things that women can do, or anybody can do to help out?
Well, I think the main thing is, especially if you don't have money. I mean, there's different ways you can do things. You know, there's teams everywhere that do the Relay for Life, which isn't just for breast cancer, but for all cancers. They have the breast cancer walks in most cities. Like we have the Mall to Mall walk at the end of the month here in Pensacola. And, you know, you can join teams, and you don't have to have all the fundraising on your, I mean, you don't have to be the one who solely donates, you know.
Right.
But you could join a team, and they have a team goal of $1,000 or whatever, and then you just pledge to do a certain percentage of that, and you solicit spare change or whatever. And even just walking in an event and paying just the $10 or $15, $20 it is to kind of join up and take a few steps. A lot of times they'll give you a T-shirt, you know, so they're, you know, and that's getting a message out. That's showing support for the cause. And, you know, my aunt just did it, my Aunt Phyllis in California.
Nice.
And her husband and her sister-in-law did it in honor of my Aunt Joyce, who passed away last year, and also my grandfather, who died of complications from Alzheimer's as well. So, you know, there are things you can do. And another thing is just being educated about, you know, the disease, and about ways that you can get the word out to other people.
Exactly. I mean, if you would just get on the internet and garner this information and share it with your girlfriends, or have a, you know, a coffee clatch and invite, you know, 8 close friends or neighbors, and just say, I want to tell you about something. This is how you know, check your your breast, and this is how you can get help if you need help to get exams, and this is what you look for, and this is a picture of, you know, what the disease might look like before it's, you know, discovered. And, you know, just giving information out is a huge help to other people. So you don't always have to have money to help, but if you do have money, this will be a great month to help out in honor of someone that you know. And I think we've all been touched by knowing somebody that has had cancer, if not breast cancer, then just cancer in general. And it's a good month to give. And it's also a good month to get information and share information, because information is certainly probably might be someone's first step in even recognizing the symptoms of breast cancer. And you may have the internet, and you may have the spare time to get information and make copies for people and hand out. I mean, you can do something. I think everyone can participate.
Well, you know, I mean, even before I started being necessarily active in trying to participate in these walks and things, you know, I used to work outside the home. And when I worked outside the home, usually you'd have a team for your company that you worked for or something, or a lot of times you would, because of someone within the company that had had a disease or had the disease. You know, there's lupus, there's heart disease, there's the Alzheimer's, there's cancer, there's just so many different ones, you know, diabetes walks. But, you know, one day I was sitting down and I was looking at the information about breast cancer, and you know, something I didn't know, and maybe it's just my naivety. I didn't even say that word. Me being naive, I'm going to say it that way.
Well, you're not French anyway. So
yeah, but, you know, it's just even thinking about the fact that it also affects men, and not just because they have someone in their lives that they get it, but men can get breast cancer.
Good point.
And I didn't know that. And I was like, wow, you know, just to learn that one little piece of information, you know, it's not just women that necessarily have to worry about this, but there are men that do get breast cancer. Now,
that's true.
The odds are much more or the statistics are much more that women get it much more than men, but there are still men out there that get it. So it's not just a woman's disease, you know. And, you know, learning just something simple like that and sharing that information, because,
right,
you know, there may be a lot of men out there that just as naive as me and that believe that, hey, you know,
right, like
something for a woman that's going to get.
That's true. Or, you know, even that could even save your husband's life one day, because you found that piece of information out. You know, and if he complains of something under here or the lymph node or somewhere else, you know, have a lump, it's just whatever, you would never know it to be that, so you wouldn't be alarmed to it. But now that you are, you may save a man's life. And so, and plus, you know, have you ever said man boobs? Have you ever said that?
Yes, I've said it.
Okay.
Not to my husband.
Because I mean,
but they do have tissue there as well.
Sure.
I mean, whether they actually have what most people term man boobs or not, they still do have tissue there.
That's true.
So,
moving on from that.
Well, there's been a hot thing on Yahoo lately that is about, well, not just on Yahoo, I guess it's all around, because I didn't know this, but apparently there are celebrities and people that are coming out and not just thinking it, but saying, hey, this is my favorite of my children. And there's kind of a big uproar that, you know, can cause problems, and they're saying, well, you know, I love both fairly or the same, you know, I don't pick one over another, but they're voicing it. And I guess maybe in my head that's where the problem can come in, because even if in your head or your heart you might have one that you like hanging out with more, like this one guy, this article I read on Yahoo this past week, he said that, you know, he did have a child, and it's because his child was older and wasn't the baby, and he'd gotten to that age where he could do stuff with them. They were kind of like pals, and they could pal around and, you know, build stuff together, or, you know, go on walks together or whatever, and he couldn't do that with the little one, so this was kind of his favorite.
Yeah, that's a poor choice of words.
To voice it, I think sometimes is where the problem comes in, because then, you know, you can cause in my mind, I could just think if I said, oh, well, you know, Rachel's my favorite, my son would just I mean,
Oh my
have his
gosh.
feelings hurt. He would feel
That's
like he wasn't good enough,
least,
maybe, or
yeah.
whatever, or vice versa, you know?
Well, I know that we always joke with our 4 boys. Actually, we always say we have 5 boys, but one of our baby boy, which was really a kitty cat, he passed away this morning, and he was really our favorite. And so we always told the boys that Coco was definitely our favorite son, because we treated him like, whatever your opinion is about, people treating their animals like humans, I don't care, but he was our baby boy. And anywho, he did pass away today, and so our favorite son did pass away today, named Coco. He's a cat, so don't get all upset thinking it was one of our human children. But I'm going somewhere with this, because we always joke with each of them, because when we see one of them, we'll always say, "You're our favorite," and then we'll see the next one, 5 minutes later, "You're our favorite." And obviously we don't have favorites. Most of the time they all come in top number 1 for aggravating us the most. And so we just don't. But each of them have separate, obviously personalities, and one of them may get along with us better in this area, and the next one will get along with us better in that area. But to say we have a favorite is, I couldn't fathom it. Now, if this person is being honest and he did have a favorite or does have a favorite, some things you just need to keep your mouth shut about. And, sad to say, if he really feels that way, I don't believe in, even though sometimes I'm accused of just saying what I think all the time. But when it comes to something like that, it's best you just keep your mouth shut and you don't tell the child.
Well, the guy said that having said this and all the flack he got back from it on Yahoo, that stated, how can you pick a favorite, and a lot of what we're saying up here, it did make him think about the fact that, he needed to revisit his relationship with his younger son and really get to know that younger son for who he was. And so, maybe in that instance, him saying something and people offering their 2 cents like we are today, gave a little food for thought so that they could, that he could grow a little. Maybe that was an area he really needed to grow in.
Sounds like it.
But he's not the only one. I mean, there's been people, and if I read the article, it was like Kelly Ripa stated which one was her favorite.
Wow.
And other stars, and stuff. And I don't remember all the names, but that was one that stuck out at me because she has her own show,
Sure.
And so, I don't know if she did it on the show or if it was outside of the show, but she's very high profile, and,
Yes.
It's not like this is something that this child's never going to come across and hear,
My goodness.
So it's just, and, I love both my children. I love them both equally. I think that, they both have their faults. They both have their high points. And at times, I'd say maybe one's my favorite over another, but it's not so much that they're my favorite, but at that moment, I guess I could tolerate them better.
Right.
Or I'm enjoying what we're doing. Like last night I took my son shopping with me because he, can't have nuts. And earlier in the day we'd had cupcakes and he couldn't have the cupcakes. So I wanted to do something for him. And, we went out to the store and I actually enjoyed it. And usually I'm like, God, I'm never taking my children shopping again.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there are lots of times that I do stuff with my daughter and it's like, hey, this is really cool. I can't do this with my son. And it's not that I love her better, or I love him better, or he's my favorite, or she's my favorite. I don't think I could pick. Because, I mean, on all honesty, there's days they're both on my nerves, and I'm like, oh, Lord.
Yeah.
Not me. I did this to myself, right? And then there's other days that I just can't imagine not having my children.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's probably all in one day sometimes, too.
Well, we are human, and but you know what? If you do have a favorite, I'm not telling you what to do, but I guess I am. I don't know. You just need to weigh.
Zip it, lock it, put it in your pocket.
Yeah, zip it, lock it, and put it in your pocket, because you can really harm, I think, a person or a child, even if they're grown. I mean, that'd be horrible. My mom and dad have 4 kids, and we always say the baby's their favorite, but he's not. I think it's me. So I try to not let the others, know about it, and try to keep it on the down low so they won't feel bad. Yeah. So I'm pretty sure I'm my parents' favorite.
And that brings me to another thing. I mean, sometimes it's not voiced, but it's very evident in the way things happen in your home. And I think that's another thing, is that we have to be careful, because, I think sometimes, even in my own home, I don't mean it to be that way, but it may seem like I'm harder on one than the other. And sometimes the child could take that as, oh, well,
that's true.
I'm a favorite, or I'm not the favorite in the house, or whatever. So I think that, being conscious of our actions too, and I think the more time that I'm around my children and trying to develop our relationship together, I see that, whereas, I may not have seen it before. And, articles like this, make me think about things like that too,
Right.
And really make you, because I know people who clearly have throughout their life not been the favorite, and I know people who clearly through their life have been the favorite. And it's not so much a parent came out and said, oh, well, Tom's my favorite, but you just, every thing that goes on is just abundantly clear.
Right.
Well,
I think sometimes that as a parent, what you do is you respond to the child, even if they're adult children, based on what they need at the time. And if you have a very needy child versus one that's very independent and carefree and goes on without a lot of intervention, and a parent's having to interact with the one that needs them the most at the time, it might be construed as the favorite. But as a parent, you have to judge. If, say, you have 4 children, the one that needs you the most at that moment, that's where you go to, and because you're responding to a certain need. And there's an old saying, or there's some, I don't know where it came from, but it's like the rose in the garden that responds the most to the gardener's care is the gardener's favorite. And I don't even know what that means most of the time, but a lot of times we have to go to the rose in our garden of children that might need us the most, and others might think that one could be our favorite, but that's not true. It just needs us the most today. Right. And so just be careful with what you're doing. And we're going to try to have an author. She's a friend of mine. She actually was my top level supervisor many years ago when I worked for the Department of Defense. And she wrote recently a book called Conscious Intentions. And it's all about thinking way ahead of time when you're dealing with people and life situations. And so, be conscious of things that you are doing, and just by being conscious of it, instead of going willy-nilly about everything, you can save a lot of hurt for yourself and most importantly, other people. And that's the main thing, is not to hurt people, but to help people, obviously. So she's thinking about getting on the show, and she's a little shy, I guess, about coming on, but I believe we're going to reel her in a couple of weeks and let her talk to us about this book that she's written. It's her second book, and so she's a local gal, and I think she's real, like, prim and proper. Yeah, it's very interesting. And I
read an article not too long ago that was kind of along those same lines, that was talking about, when you're parenting, especially when it's a spouse, two-parent family, because there's a lot of parents that are single parents raising children these days, or even step-parents, but that you're on the same page. And even if you're a single parent, kind of knowing, like, maybe in advance how you're going to deal with a situation. Not so much that you're so rigid that you can't be flexible and you can't hear all the details going on with the situation so that you can, look at it objectively, but it's more so of being conscious of of how you're going to deal with it in advance, so that you're not reacting on the spot to something and overreacting. Or even if you're not overreacting, but reacting to where it's going to be a negative instead of something you can learn and grow from. And I thought that was kind of interesting. Do I put it all into practice? No, but I'm working on it.
There you go.
So,
and that's what it's about. It's not about being perfect. It's about, learning as we get older. We have so many more things to learn, I believe. And actually, the lack of learning holds, more dire consequences as we get older, because we've got to learn things that will help and encourage other people. And that's the legacy that you leave if you don't have, a pile of money to be a philanthropist and whatnot. You can leave this legacy of information and a good example and a good name and, good children and good grandchildren that will follow your good example. And so it's so important to be such a good example. And I'm not saying, to just, walk this holy grail. That's not even what I was going to say. I was going to say holier than thou, line and, be so stuck up and uppity that, I can't touch beer, or, I don't want to smell the cigarettes, or, just that kind of old religious nonsense that have put people down for ages. But, be the kind of person that is a good example by unconditional love and unconditional acceptance. And Joanne Basil put something on, I think she put it on our timeline today on Facebook about, well, I want to save that for another show. It's worthy. She was quoting, I'm assuming, the Naked Pastor, and about being open to other people that are different. And we talk a lot about that.
Right.
And God knows if everybody, were like me, it would be in a peck of trouble.
I was thinking about that with, kids and people and just everything. And it came to my mind after the show where George was on the show. And, I thought about, all these people who live these pious, holier-than-thou lives where, they got all these strict and stringent rules for themselves, for their children, for their lives. I would almost rather, I think, have my child exposed to someone who, like George, who had made mistakes, who had, done time in prison, but had come out stronger and better and had a love for people and wanted to see people blessed and the world changed for the better and everything than I would someone who just pushed everybody to the side because they couldn't be around anybody that was different than them.
Right.
To me, I see more of the character of Jesus in George than I do someone who never touches a beer, never touches a cigarette, never has stolen, never has told a lie, is in church 24/7. Every time the doors are open, they're there. I just, and maybe that's me, but I think that, we have to, I saw someone put it on Facebook today. It was one of my high school friends. It was a picture of Jesus on the cross, and it said, did Jesus allow himself to be nailed to this cross so that you could spread bigotry and hatred? And I thought about all the people, like George,
sure,
who are shunned and who are pushed to the side because they're different, because they've had problems in their lives, because they've turned to drugs and alcohol, or because they've, chosen, or because they're born loving someone of a different, of the same sex, or because they love someone of a different color,
sure,
or, just all the reasons that we find to cause trouble. And I think that, we just have to really, really start to love and lose these shackles of these strict, stringent mindsets that have caused us to shove people to the side. And
that's true.
Not learn and love from them.
That's true. So today we're encouraging you once again to go out there and love somebody different than yourself. And we're going to wrap up. We've got some great shows. Obviously, the schedule by now, I hope. At 3 p.m. we have William Torres bringing the good news to you in Spanish. So if you have any Spanish-speaking relatives or friends or neighbors, hook them up with William's show. 4 o'clock, we have T-Bog, The Beginnings of Greatness with
Madness.
The Beginnings of Madness.
Just kidding. We love them.
Joey and Matt. And then at 5 o'clock, of course, with New Covenant Group Jasper and our great friends and partners there. And then at 6, Greg Bray has a guest on tonight, and I'll let you read about that. And at 7, Bob Graves has a guest as well. Then from 8 to 10, Dr. Jones and I will be hosting Greg Bray as our guest. And you need to bring pencil and paper and take notes, because Greg is going to give us quite the education on probably evolution and biological things, and so it's going to be some fantastic information all day today. And so be prepared for all that. And we thank you for tuning in. And FYI, God did not send those 2 bears and maul those children. Come on, folks. Use your head. Use your head. God gave it to you. Use your head. All right, we love you. Peace out.